really fun topic for you all today. Um, if God exists, why do I suffer? Now, I've noticed over the last few conferences, they always ask Jimmy Akin to give the hard talk, which I suppose is a compliment. Frankly, I'd rather be complimented a little less in that regard. But we're going to do what we can to make it fun and interesting. But there are a couple of really important words in the question, the words God and suffering. So we're going to be talking about God and suffering. Now, fun fact, suffering is a form of evil. Okay, this is how theologians and philosophers classify it. It is not the normal form of evil that we think about. Normally, when we think about evil, we think about moral evil, or what's otherwise known as sin. But philosophers and theologians also classify suffering as a form of physical evil. And there are a few other forms of physical evil as well that we'll talk about. Now, when you put evil and God together, you get, well, it's not as good as Reese's peanut butter cups. The God part is awesome, the evil not so much. You get what, what is known in philosophy and theology as the problem of evil. And it's often considered the hardest problem in Christian apologetics. So naturally, I get to talk about it. One of the reasons that it's considered, actually a couple of the reasons that it's considered the hardest problem in apologetics is because it involves personal feeling. This is not just an intellectual puzzle like how old are these dinosaur bones. This is something people actually feel. Also, we have incomplete data regarding some of the solutions to the problem of evil. So this talk is going to have both a personal feeling component and an incomplete data component where we address both of those problems. Now, what is the problem of evil? It can be put different ways, but one of the ways, a simple way, is like this. If God exists and is all good, all-knowing, and all-powerful, then he would prevent evil from existing. Evil exists, therefore, God must not exist or must not be all good, knowing, and powerful. So, that's a concise way of stating the problem of evil. This form is known as the logical problem of evil. But, and I don't know if you've ever read much Thomas Aquinas, but like if you read the Summa Theologia, he'll be considering a question at do pigs live in trees? And he'll consider a bunch of arguments for the wrong position. It would seem that pigs live in trees, and then he'll have a bunch of arguments for why pigs live in trees. And then he'll say, but, and in Latin, what he technically says is sed contra, which is Latin for but against this, and he'll have an argument against pigs living in trees, and then he'll give the correct answer. So we're going to have some buts in this talk. And every time I say a red but, your job is to say sed contra. Okay? Let's try it. But, excellent. Keep up that enthusiasm. So, we've just seen the logical problem of evil, but God does exist, and he is all good, knowing, and powerful. Therefore, something's wrong with the previous argument. So what's wrong with it? Well, it's not that evil exists. Evil definitely exists, let me tell you. But, no, that wasn't a red but. I get to say but. You don't have to say sed contra every time. There will be good points for the enthusiasm, though. The problem is that first premise. If God exists and is all good, all-knowing, and all-powerful, then he would prevent evil. That's false. There are exceptions to that premise. It sounds plausible at first, but when you look at it, there are exceptions, and that's why the conclusion does not follow. So, what's an exception? Well, someone can exist and be good, knowing, and powerful, and still allow an evil if there is a good reason for it. So what about moral evil? Let's illustrate how that works. This is just a brief detour since our problem is physical evil or suffering in this talk, but we can illustrate why one would allow an evil by looking at moral evil. So we'll take a brief detour. Why does God allow moral evil? Well, moral evil is the misuse of free will. To have free will, you have to allow the possibility of moral evil. Otherwise, it's not free. If God didn't allow us to have free will, or didn't allow us to have the possibility of committing moral evil, we would just be programmed to be good. We'd be like robots. And without free will, love would lack an important quality. It wouldn't be freely chosen. And so God could program us to just act lovingly, and we could just be robots and behave lovingly, but we wouldn't have freely chosen to love God. And if you think about a robot that's programmed to behave lovingly versus a person that has freely chosen to be loving, you can see there's a difference between those two things. Now, love is God's highest priority, and we know that because it's the two top commandments. What's the first great commandment? And the second? So the two greatest commandments are both about love. So that's God's highest priority. And in order to allow love to be freely chosen, God must therefore allow moral evil. And that's why he has a good reason to allow moral evil, because he could eliminate moral evil, but the price would be eliminating free will and turning us all into robots. But moral evil results in suffering. If you drive recklessly, you can cause suffering. If you overindulge, you can suffer. And if you set off nuclear bombs in inhabited areas, you can cause suffering. So moral evil results in suffering. Therefore, we haven't fully solved the problem yet. We've offered a plausible reason why God allows moral evil, but we haven't yet figured out why he allows physical evil. So what about physical evil? Well, here we get back to our main subject for the talk. There are different kinds of physical evil. One of them is intellectual evil, which can involve a lack of knowledge or false knowledge, misinformation. And for, subjects like that, we had Carlos talk last night. Other forms of physical evil include physical pain, emotional pain, and death. And since our talk is about suffering, we're going to focus on physical and emotional pain. So, hello, my name is Jimmy. This is the personal feeling part of the talk. Chris Check asked me to, in giving this talk, to be open and even a little bit vulnerable in sharing some of my own experiences with suffering. And I said to myself, that's a good idea. And if you're talking about suffering, a few months ago, I went on a podcast from a British YouTuber and podcaster named Sam, who had lost his Christian faith. And so he called his channel When Belief Dies. And he had an audience of mostly atheists and agnostics. And he wanted me to come on and offer a Christian perspective on the problem of suffering, which was one of the big things that was motivating him. So I did, and in talking about suffering on his podcast, I shared my own experiences to show the atheist, agnostic audience that I've been there. This is not just an intellectual puzzle to me, like how old are these dinosaur bones? I've suffered. And so by sharing those experiences with him and his audience, he saw that this is something I've been through too. So actually, I'm happy to report he's lost his loss of faith. And he is now shut down When Belief Dies in order to nurture and re-engage with his Christian faith. So I'm going to tell you about my sufferings, but I'm not going to tell you this way. I don't know if y'all remember the show Hee Haw. It was a musical comedy syndicated show. It was very popular. I watched it all the time when I was a kid. And one of the things they had was a regular segment where you had these four guys sitting around, and it was a comedy sketch, but they would sing about their sufferings. And so they were expressing sorrow with no sense of hope. And the lyrics went like this. They would all sing, no, 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 no. Not yet. I'll tell you when. The lyrics went like this: gloom, despair, and agony on me. And then one of the guys would go, whoa, deep, dark depression, excessive misery. And another would go, whoa, if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. And a third one would go, whoa, gloom, despair, and agony on me. So we're going to sing this. I'm going to sing the lyrics. Your job is to do the whoas. So let's try it. 1, 2, 3. Whoa. Good. Suffer as much as possible. Really project that feeling, okay? So now, hit it. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. So that's what I'm not going to do. In fact, I have a disclaimer to give. I'm actually a very happy guy. I have a reputation for being calm and gentle and imperturbable. In fact, at a Catholic Answers event a few years ago, one of our supporters was saying, you know, if Jimmy Akin told me my house had just burned down, it would be like, oh, my house is burned down. It'll be okay. We'll get through this. It'll be fine. You know, so I tend to have a kind of calming effect. And I have a lot of sources of satisfaction in my life. There's my Catholic faith, obviously. Also, I have the joy of learning and discovery because I'm constantly studying. I have the joy of teaching, the joy of helping others, the joy of music and dance, the joy of being creative, the joy of living in Arkansas instead of California. I'm going to be getting dogs soon, and so I've got a lot of great stuff going on. So remember, Jimmy Akin is very happy. But it wasn't always that way. Now, things started out well. My parents remember my early years being very happy. That's me and my mom there. My mom is the one on the left. And this is the mid-1960s, so my mom is wearing her very stylish Jackie Kennedy haircut. And there I am as a baby enjoying my first winter and wondering what that strange object my dad is holding is. So things were very happy early on, but things started to go badly when I began school because I have a learning disability. How many of y'all would have guessed that Jimmy Akin has a learning disability? Not very many. Well, I do. I have dyslexia, which made it hard for me to learn to read. And I eventually mastered it. I started reading at an advanced, like 8th grade level by the time I was in 5th grade, but it was very hard. And so that caused problems. Also, possibly because of the dyslexia, I was, and the classroom problems I had, I was unpopular and bullied in school. I also did not get along with my father, and we had lots of arguments because anything less than an A was not acceptable. So every 9 weeks, I would bring home a report card, and there would be a bunch of A's on it. And there would be 2 or 3 things that weren't A's. And I knew that that meant that night we were going to have a multi-hour argument, regular as clockwork. Well, my dad, who was a mechanical engineering professor, also functioned as an expert witness. He would testify in court cases using his expertise on engineering to address aspects of like personal injury cases and things like that. And he was considered very good and very in demand by the local attorneys for how good he was on the stand as an expert witness. And I've sometimes half joked that it was all those arguments he and I had that made him a good expert witness and made me a good philosopher and apologist, because we really butted heads and iron sharpens iron. As a consequence of the nothing less than an A is acceptable policy, my actual academic achievements were underappreciated. In 1982, I went to the Arkansas Governor's School, which was a school for gifted and talented high school juniors. So other people were recognizing my academic abilities. Then when I got into college, my parents were repeatedly surprised by me repeatedly making the dean's list, which you need high grades to get. And then the university started giving me academic awards, both for being a good philosophy student and for being a good philosophy teacher, because in grad school I was a teaching assistant and I would teach philosophy. In fact, that picture of me is one my mom took right after they gave me an award for being an outstanding philosophy teacher. In fact, for my last 2 semesters, I was getting the highest student evaluations in the department, higher even than the tenured faculty. So all of this came as a bit of a surprise given the nothing less than an A is acceptable policy, and there were a few things that were less than A's, but most of them were A's. Fortunately, in my adult life, my relationship with my father improved, and by the time he died, we were fully reconciled. There were other things going on, though. I was severely mistreated by employers. One of my employers, I believe, and this is not a joke, he was so cruel and uncompassionate towards his employees that I think he would have scored not super high, but somewhat high on the PCLR psychopathy checklist. So I had to deal with that. Also, I got married, then that was good, but my wife had severe health problems. And I spent a lot of our marriage just taking care of her. After she died, I would walk into supermarkets and pharmacies and realize I was looking at everything through the lens of, would this make Renee's life easier? And then I'd realize, but she's dead now. And so it took me a while to unlearn that habit. Also, while she was alive, since you don't make a lot of money as a philosophy teaching assistant, we were experiencing crushing poverty. I remember going through the cushions of our sofa, trying to find enough coins to be able to go to the supermarket and buy a pack of hot dogs and a can of generic lemonade so that we could have food that night. So that was not fun. And then Renee died. She was only sick for about 2.5 months, and we only knew what it was for a little more than a month. It was colon cancer. And it was an extremely aggressive form that her doctor believed she'd only had for a few months, and it just ripped through her and killed her very quickly. Then I had a traumatic move out to California to come to work for Catholic Answers. And part of the trauma of that move, it was a complete change of life, and I was working through grief, for my wife's death the previous year. And as I was starting to recover, and I even started dating again, because I didn't want to be a permanent widower. I wanted to get remarried and have kids and everything. My mom unexpectedly died. She came home one day and had a berry aneurysm. And this was completely unexpected, given how long the women in her family line live. My mom died 40 years too early. She should have lived to her mid to late 90s. That's how long the other women in her family lived. She died at 56. And so just as I was healing from Renee's death, Mom dies. And that put me back into a grief trauma situation all over again. What's more, Mom was the hub of the family. She was the one person that everybody in the family knew how to relate to. And so it was like the center had dropped out of my family. Also, your parents, and I assume most people here have probably lost a parent at this point, but your parents are like the 2 pillars of your universe. They've always been there for as long as you can remember. And all of a sudden, one of the pillars is gone. And that's just weird when that happens for the first time. And with Mom and Renee dying, my wife and my mother, the two most important women in my life, dying unexpectedly and landing me in pain, I had a bit of a feeling of abandonment. So, this didn't last forever. I gradually healed, and now I'm very happy. Father's Day is still tough, though, because Father's Day is a Sunday, and that means I have to go to Mass on Father's Day. And when I show up in the parish on Father's Day, I don't know what they're going to do. They may ask all the fathers in the parish to stand up and be recognized, in which case I get to sit there. Or as you're leaving parish, they may have the ushers greet all of the men coming out and wish them a happy Father's Day. And I get wished a happy Father's Day. And I very much wanted to be a father, but I'm not. A secret hope that I have shared with some people, it's not too big of a secret, is we have evidence that between a third and half of all pregnancies spontaneously abort or miscarry within the first few weeks of pregnancy before the mother is even aware that she's pregnant. It is possible that Renee and I had children that I don't know about. And therefore, there's a little secret hope that when I get to heaven, I may have a surprise. I may turn out to be a father after all. I don't know. It's just a hope. But anyway, these days, Jimmy Akin is very happy. But I've paid my dues. So this is the personal feeling part of the talk. So this isn't how old are those dinosaur bones to me. I've been there. I've suffered. And so I have some standing to say I understand the issue of suffering, and I can speak to this issue from the perspective of someone who has suffered. So, is there a good reason why God would allow pain and suffering? Do you want me to tell you? Well, as the time-traveling archaeologist River Song would say, spoilers, sweetie. Here's the spoiler. If you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 324, it says, faith gives us the certainty that God would not permit an evil if he did not cause a good to come from that very evil. So that's the fundamental reason why God allows suffering. He would not allow it, except that he's going to bring an equal or greater good out of that very evil. So, what's the good that justifies something like physical pain? Well, we can figure that out by asking a question like, well, why do we have physical pain? Quick biology lesson. Our bodies contain special pain-sensing nerves called nociceptors. That's from the Latin word nocere, which means to hurt. So these are hurt-sensing nerves. They're designed to sense it when we are hurt. They connect to our peripheral nervous system and then to our central nervous system, and they send pain signals up to our brains. They do this not to torture our brains, but to alert us to the fact that we're being injured. Like if you put your hand on a hot stove without thinking, your nociceptors are going to let you know really fast so that you can get your hand off of that hot stove and you can stop being injured. So that's the fundamental purpose of physical pain. It is to alert us to a danger so that we can protect ourselves. Well, what would happen if we couldn't feel pain? We actually know the answer to that because there is a condition called congenital insensitivity to pain, or CIP. It's also known as congenital analgesia, and it is one or more extraordinarily rare conditions in which a person cannot feel and has never felt physical pain. Because feeling physical pain is vital for survival, CIP is an extremely dangerous condition. It is common for people with the condition to die in childhood due to injuries or illnesses going unnoticed. Burn injuries are among the most common. So here we see a little boy playing with a stove. If he's got congenital insensitivity to pain, when he pulls down that pot of scalding water on him, he's going to get scalded and not care. He can have horrible burns, his flesh can break open, he can get infected. He may even start bleeding if a blood vessel bursts, and he'll just go about his business playing. Or this little boy in the middle, if he gets hit by that car, he could have internal injuries and not care because he doesn't feel the pain of the auto impact. I was watching a video of a man who survived childhood, who had congenital insensitivity to pain, who was recounting when he was young, he had a birthday as a little boy, and he broke his foot on his birthday. But he didn't want it to spoil his birthday, so he just duct taped his foot up and ran off and kept playing. Or, here's a third little boy, he's sick in bed. But if he has congenital insensitivity to pain, his parents might notice he's got a runny nose, but he's not going to be moaning, he's not going to be suffering, and they may think, oh, this is no big deal, it's just a little cold, when it's a life-threatening illness. So, which would you prefer? Congenital insensitivity to pain, where you never feel physical pain, or normal pain perception, which amounts to normal danger perception? How many people would like congenital insensitivity to pain? How many people would like normal pain perception? Good choice. Charles Darwin would approve. That's the survival one. Okay, so God allows us to have physical pain to protect us from danger. By giving us the ability to sense pain, he gives us the ability to protect ourselves. Now, the physical pain is itself bad, it's a physical evil, but he allows it to enable us to have the greater good of protection so that injuries don't kill us. And you know what? We do the same thing. We vaccinate our children. Now, vaccination, as this little tyke here is illustrating for us, ain't fun, especially if you're a little kid and you don't know what's going on, and your parents who love you and take care of you have suddenly taken you to this strange place and allowing strangers to stick metal things in your body that hurt. And you experience pain, and you experience fear, and you wail your tiny little head off, because that's what you're supposed to do. Well, that's painful for the child. But the parents know this is a momentary pain. And this momentary pain is vastly outweighed by being protected from a horrible disease like smallpox or typhoid or measles, mumps, or rubella, or whatever it may be. And so we ourselves do this with our children. We allow our children, we do it as adults too when we go to the doctor, but we do it with our children by allowing them to experience a momentary pain that is counterbalanced by a greater good. And in the same way, God allows his children, us, to experience momentary pain that is counterbalanced by a greater good, the good of protection from dangers. So that's physical pain. What about emotional pain? There are a bunch of different types of emotional pain, but the same basic principles apply. Emotional pain exists to alert us to a problem so that we can solve it. And there are a bunch of different problems we might have emotional pain about. We might get scared for our health or even our life. We might have relationship problems. We might be afraid of losing our spouse. We might be afraid of losing our job. We might be afraid for our finances. So there are a lot of different problems we can have that we can experience negative emotions about. So how do they help us? Well, depression prompts reflection on the source of a problem. You know, there's something we'll be obsessing about when we're depressed. And that enables us to identify and hopefully figure out a way to eliminate the problem. Sadness prompts us to reflect on a thing of value that we've lost. and we can try to figure out how to avoid similar losses in the future. Sadness also, because it involves things like crying, it serves as a social signal to tell others that we are in need of help, so they can provide comfort or other forms of assistance to us. Anger means we've identified a threat that needs to be dealt with. We may deal with it in an anger situation with what you could consider a fight reaction or an engagement reaction. It may not be a literal fight, but you may engage with the thing you're angry at in order to solve the problem. On the other hand, fear, similarly, involves identifying a threat that needs to be resolved, only we may deal with it with a flight response instead of a fight response. We may want to avoid the source of danger. But one way or another, both physical and emotional pain have important functions. Both of them alert us and motivate us to deal with problems so that we can avoid them. That's why they exist. And they perform their function admirably. But what about non-functional pain? This is where we get to the incomplete data part of the talk. You'll see why. Sometimes we have pain, it could be physical, it could be emotional, when there is no way to fix the problem. Here, the pain is doing what it should. It's alerting us to a problem, but for the particular problem we're facing, there is no solution, like having an incurable illness. The pain, thus, is not performing a useful function for us, so it's non-functional pain. Why would God allow this? Well, since God allows it, there must be a good coming from it. So what is that good? Well, one possibility is that it's not to help the individual, but to help humanity as a whole. By allowing individuals to have non-functional pain, it motivates the community to find solutions that will help everybody in the future, like finding cures to presently incurable diseases. If some people have presently incurable diseases, that motivates researchers to find cures for them to help people who have them in the future. Thus, God might allow an individual or a small group of people to suffer in order to help everybody. Is it reasonable to allow one individual or a small group to suffer in order to help everybody? Can you think of any examples where it would be? How about this one? God applies this logic to himself, where God the Son voluntarily took on suffering to save the world. So God does this to himself. He takes on suffering to help everybody. And you know what? We do the same thing. Soldiers voluntarily jump on grenades to save others. Parents voluntarily sacrifice to help their children. By the way, happy Father's Day. So it's an agreed principle that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. So God agrees to this principle, we agree to this principle as well. Therefore, God may allow some people to suffer, or in this context have non-functional pain, in order to help many more. But wouldn't this be unfair to the person who's suffering? Well, would it really be unfair? I mean, how much non-functional pain do we tend to have? The vast majority of the time, our pain is functional, like when you burn your hand on a stove. That's functional pain. Truly non-functional pain, where there just is no solution and you're suffering anyway, that's rare in life. That's not that common. I don't know what the exact percentages would be, but I would say 90% of the time when we're in pain, there's a solution. Maybe 10% of the time, like when we're in our final illness in life. Okay, well, there's no solution, we're in our final illness, so this pain is non-functional, but I don't know, maybe 10% of the pain we feel in life is truly non-functional. And again, the pain that we have, most of it is functional. It is performing a valid function for us. Remember when I asked the question, which would you rather have, congenital insensitivity to pain or normal pain perception? As imperfect as normal pain perception is, everybody raised their hands, they'd rather have normal pain perception. So the non-functional pain does not counterbalance the functional pain that we have in life. And life is not just pain. Most of the time, we're not in pain. There will be seasons where we're in pain, like when we're sick or depressed or something like that, but most of the time, we're not in pain. I guesstimated for this that, 90% of the time in life, we're not really in pain. Of that 10% when we would be in pain, I guesstimated 9% of that would be functional, and maybe only 1% would be non-functional. Now, you could disagree with these estimates. People are different and they have different experiences, but the vast majority of people agree that the good outweighs the bad, and life is worth living, as evidenced by the fact that the world suicide rate is 1.3%. That means 98.7% of the world population, including people who are not Christian and do not have suicide as a mortal sin, they still don't kill themselves. Everybody, with 1.3% exception, agrees life is worth living. And even though they don't have a religious imperative to live it till the very end, they live it to the very end anyway. So we agree generally as a species that even in spite of the pain we have in life, it's still good on balance. It's still worth it. And remember, we ourselves are willing to make trade-offs. As long as the good outweighs the bad, we don't consider it unfair. That's why we inoculate our children. They come out on the plus side. Even though we allow some pain in their lives, they still are going to benefit from having it. And if we take that attitude with our children, we really shouldn't complain too much when God approaches us the same way. But what about a worst case scenario? Someone who has a really horrible life. Well, there's this podcast. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's available on all the standard podcast apps. It's at mysterious.fm. And you can also see it in video form at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, where you need to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you get a notification for all of my videos that come out during the week. Would anybody like to take a momentary excursion to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World to hear about a worst case scenario? Okay, when people are talking like, skeptics, atheists, agnostics, when they're talking about the problem of evil as an argument against God, they often focus on a worst case scenario that involves animal suffering, on the presumption that animals don't have an afterlife, so God can't make it up to them in the afterlife for any suffering they had during life. They also tend to focus on a young animal, partly because young animals don't have long lives behind them. They haven't had a bunch of good times to compensate for their final suffering. And then they imagine a really horrible, painful death for this young animal. So let's suppose that Disney decides to make a new, modern, grittier version of Bambi. And in the new, modern, gritty version of Bambi, Bambi dies in the forest fire, which shows about as much crowd-pleasing sense as Disney has been displaying lately in their remakes. So what would happen in this new modern version of Bambi, where Bambi dies in a fire? Well, it would alter the ratios for Bambi. He's a year old or so at the point of the fire, so he's still young. He's a young buck in the literal sense. And so he hasn't had a huge amount of good times, but he has had some. And he's also had some other pain, but a lot of it was functional. Still, though, the forest fire was short. That would be only a few minutes or maybe an hour or two of Bambi's experience in life. And so even if he had intense non-functional pain for an hour or two out of his year of life, I still think Bambi would come out on the plus side. He'd still have more good experiences than bad ones. So this wouldn't be unfair to him in principle. But what if you come up with a worst case scenario? I mean, suppose Disney comes up with a third remake, and in it, Bambi's pregnant mother dies in a forest fire towards the end of pregnancy during the opening credits. Well, the typical gestation period for deer is about 200 days. And so Bambi would not have even been conscious for most of that. He's in the womb. His neurology has to develop to a certain level for him to be conscious in the womb and also to feel pain in the womb. I still think he'd probably come out on top, on the plus side, but maybe not. Let's just grant that Bambi 3 is so horrific, Bambi, it comes out on the minus side. What could we say to that? Well, among people who don't believe that animals have an afterlife, a common solution is to say animals don't have rights. God doesn't owe them anything, so if they suffer needlessly, God's not being unfair to them because they don't have a right to any other treatment. But God still cares for them. Even if they don't have rights, they still have God's care. The Psalms say that God gives the beasts their food. Jesus himself says, look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. So God obviously cares about animals. So just because they don't have rights doesn't mean we don't have a question here. If God loves and cares about animals, why would he allow this worst case scenario where Bambi 3 dies in the womb? Well, one thing we might want to ask is it true that animals have no afterlife? Much to my surprise, after years of repeating the common answer, when I actually started to look into this, I discovered this is not church teaching. This is just a theological opinion. And it's not even a universal opinion. There are Christian thinkers who are fine with the idea of at least some animals having an afterlife. They include, in recent times, C.S. Lewis and Peter Kreeft. There are also precedents in church history, but there are two recent ones that you would know the names of. So in episode 203, this is where Mysterious World becomes important. In episode 203 of Mysterious World, I looked at the question of animal afterlife. I realized that the arguments that are used to argue that animals don't have an afterlife, they're not theological, they're philosophical. They're not based on the Bible, they're not based on, revelation that was handed down to us from Jesus and the apostles. They're based on philosophical arguments that come from Aristotle. And so in episode 203, I went through those arguments and I concluded, I don't think they're conclusive. I don't think they prove what they're trying to prove. And I was aware that we actually have some experiential evidence that some animals do survive death. I'm not going to spoil what that evidence is, but I found it very surprising, and I was surprised how much of it there is. So if you want to know about that, you can go to mysterious.fm/203. Having said that, I had to change my position. I'm now with C.S. Lewis and Peter Kreeft. I think it's possible that at least some animals have an afterlife. And if animals do have an afterlife, then they're in the same boat that we're in. So what boat are we in? You are now leaving Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We have an afterlife, and that has implications for the problem of suffering. St. Paul discusses it in Romans and in 2 Corinthians. In Romans, St. Paul says, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. This slight momentary affliction, that's whatever suffering we have right now, this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, because we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. So what St. Paul is saying is that the sufferings of this life are vastly outweighed by the reward that God has for us in the next life. Because the sufferings of this life, they're finite, they're going to end. But the glory we're going to have in the next life, that reward, is going to go on forever. So its value is infinite. And I know for some of us it's been a while since we had math in school, but just as a refresher, infinite is infinitely bigger than finite. So, therefore, no matter what you suffer in this life, no matter what, God will more than make it up to you in the next. And remember, we find trade-offs like that acceptable even in this life. So, for the last time, but you, Jimmy Akin, have been saying that God has good reasons for allowing suffering. You've named some of the reasons, like protecting free will, alerting us to danger, maybe helping others in the community, but you haven't explained all of God's reasons. So, what are the others? To be honest, the truth is, we don't know. This is a mystery for now. And that's why this is the incomplete data part of the talk, because we don't know all of the reasons why God has for allowing every form of suffering. And the Catechism acknowledges this. In 3:14, the Catechism says, "The ways of God's providence are often unknown to us. Only at the end, when our partial knowledge ceases, when we see God face to face, will we fully know the ways by which, even through the dramas of evil and sin," those are our topics today, "God has guided his creation." It also says in 3:24 that faith gives us the certainty that God would not permit an evil if he did not cause a good to come from that very evil by ways that we shall fully know only in eternal life. By allowing us to experience suffering to bring about a greater good, even though we don't always know the reason why, God's treating us as his children. Because we do that with our children. We do the same thing. We give a baby an inoculation, even though the baby has no way of understanding what the inoculation is for. And the same thing is probably true of us. We probably cannot presently understand all of the different goods that God is going to cause to come from our sufferings. There's probably way more reasons than we can even conceive of. We have teeny little finite minds, and he sees the big, big picture. But as babies age, they become capable of understanding things like what's an inoculation for and why should you have one. And we will be capable of understanding God's reasons in the next life. So then we will know the good reasons that God allowed the different forms of suffering in our life. Even now, though, we do know something that our babies don't. Based on our experiences with our own children, we know that there can be good reasons to allow them to have temporary pain to bring about a greater good. In fact, we know that loving parents do that with their children. From this, we can infer that, as a loving Father, our Heavenly Father must have a good reason for allowing our suffering. And in light of that knowledge, we can trust him even now. So my bottom line for today's mystery: God can allow suffering if there is a good reason. God would not allow any suffering unless he was going to bring about an equal or greater good out of it. God allows moral evil in order to allow love to be freely chosen. He allows functional pain, both physical and mental, to alert us to danger and motivate us to fix the situation so that we're not further injured. Why he allows non-functional pain is less clear. It may be to help others in some cases, but he will make sure that we are more than compensated with an infinite reward for any of the finite non-functional pain that we suffer in this life. We won't know the good reasons why he allows some sufferings until the next life, but based on our experience with our own children, we can trust him even now. And so our suffering is coupled with hope. Eric, hit it. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Meet your favorite apologists, listen to great talks, hang out with your fellow Catholics, and more. Sign up today for our 10th annual conference. Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ.